Amen. We all have stories of moving and settling into some place, don't we? Yeah. Choosing a place to live, which may be determined by our career circumstances or family or other matters. Finding the grocery store, the barber shop, the drugstore, setting up our home with furniture, etc. No doubt we face challenges and bumps along the way when we go through these transitions, and that may be the favorite part of the stories that we tell when we move or go through major life transitions. I'm reminded of our story of transition when we moved from Orange County to San Carlos in 2004. I was taking a call to a church in this town about 20 miles south of San Francisco from a large community in Southern California. The movers had come to assess our little condominium in Huntington Beach, and they went through and they sort of inventoried all the items and let us know what happened on the day of the move. They assured us that the day of the movers would come and just be very helpful, make sure that all our stuff was packed up and ready to go. We wouldn't have any problems with that. Although the majority would have to be done by us. We decided to pack everything ourselves, unless we paid extra for them to do it all, which we didn't want to do. The morning of the move, a truck arrived, a big truck to load all our stuff. The deliverers were very friendly. Oh, everything's fine, don't worry. The movers will be along in a little while. Why don't you go to breakfast and just relax? Everything's going to be great. You think you know where this is going, right? Well, we got back, and the actual movers, very different crowd. One of them was a very nice young man. The other one was just really not nice at all. Was very rude to us and kind of yelled at us for these tiny items that we had lying around everywhere. Who do we think we were, not boxing these up? And this wasn't ready to go. And he had places to be. And at one point, he was about to leave without having packed all of our items. And I just really wasn't a very nice, genteel pastor at that moment. I had to call the head office, and we had a little strife, let's just say. All of this while we had a toddler, and my wife, Neil, was pregnant with our second son, Lucas. Moving is obviously an emotionally sensitive time, which was completely lost on this crew. All this, added to all this, is the moving company was managed by a member of the congregation that I served. Yeah. But as rude as the crew was that moved us out of Orange County, we did eventually make it out in one piece. The crew that moved us into our home in San Carlos was equally as nice and friendly and helpful, and which we very much appreciated. And eventually we did settle into our new home in a small, family-oriented community that was ideal for us at that time. Today's gospel is kind of a miniature version of a story like that. Joseph moves his family to a new place, but they face some serious challenges on the way, and admittedly much worse than a rude moving crew. We hear the story in Matthew's gospel of Jesus' birth and childhood from Joseph's perspective, which is interesting. He has a dream where an angel appears to him and warns him that King Herod is seeking to kill their son Jesus. And what parent wouldn't immediately take evasive action if they thought their family, their children were threatened or were in danger? And so they flee to Egypt as they're directed, to sidestep Herod's tyranny and to find a safe haven. Matthew is the most Jewish of all evangelists, and Egypt is a place where many of God's people Israel had fled in the past. So this is a significant piece to the story. This story of Jesus' birth and childhood recalls Israel's slavery in the land of the Pharaohs. Not so positive of an experience, of course. But it also mirrors another older story of Egypt, where Abraham and Sarah, this is in Genesis 12, Abraham and Sarah, who were at the time still Abram and Sarai before their names had been changed, go to Egypt because there's a famine in the land of Canaan where they are. Now this is immediately after God had called Abram from the land of Ur of the Chaldeans, from the Babylonia area, to this strange new territory that he promised that he would give him, and he would give him and his wife's descendants, and that through them all nations of the world would be blessed. When Abraham arrived, he wandered, camped, scouted, observed these Canaanites, and set up altars all around the territory to offer praise and sacrifice and worship of this God that he was convinced was leading him on this journey. Then the famine hit, and they had to leave to find food. In the story, and you may have heard this part too, Abraham is concerned about going to Egypt because his wife is pretty good looking. And he decides to use her good looks because he knows that if he just goes there, they'll take her away and then kill him. So he asks her to pose as his sister, which she does, and ends up in the house of Pharaoh. And then there's all kinds of connotations about what that might mean, ending up in the house of Pharaoh, right? But Abraham is spared. And there's curses and plagues on the house of Pharaoh for doing this. And so Pharaoh sends Sarah away with Abraham. Get him out of here. I don't want anyone near here. But Abraham leaves with wealth and livestock, and they return to the place that God had originally sent them and set up altars and offer praises to God in Bethel, that initial place. He has a nephew, Lot, and they decide they each have too much livestock and too big of a household to inhabit the same space. So Lot moves east, and Abraham stays where he is. The land isn't his yet. It's still a promise from God. But God reiterates after this that this is the land that Abraham is to receive. And that is his and Sarah's descendants will be as numerous as the grains of dust in the earth. These stories about Egypt no doubt linger in the memory and the imagination of those ancient Jews hearing about a child named Jesus who will one day be called Messiah. Jesus' family, like the great patriarch Abraham, had to flee to Egypt for safety. The story roots Jesus' life even deeper in the story of God's people, Israel. But Joseph still has to decide where to move. Herod had died, but Herod's son Archelaus was still a threat to Jesus and his family. So Joseph sets down roots a long ways away from there in a little village called Nazareth, in the territory of Galilee, not far from the Sea of Galilee. This is the old northern kingdom of Israel, nowhere near Jerusalem or Archelaus or Judea in the south. The north, before it was ravaged and decimated by Assyrians in the 8th century BC, and before it split from the southern kingdom in a civil war centuries before that, had been the land of many of Israel's tribes: Gad and Asher, Zebulun and Naphtali, Dan and Issachar, Manasseh and Ephraim. These sons of Jacob who became Israel had settled in this land after God's people were freed from slavery in Egypt. But at the time of Jesus, the north was a very different place than it had been. Perhaps it was a quiet and quaint place to settle down roots, to raise a family. We can't say with certainty what Jesus' childhood and youth were like. There are a few stories in the Gospels, such as the story in Luke's Gospel of Jesus getting lost at the temple when his parents take him. He's, of course, found debating and teaching the rabbis at age 12, which portends quite a big future in religious leadership and education for him. And there is the tradition that Jesus' father was a carpenter. Other than that, the story of Jesus' childhood and youth is left to imagination. But we can draw from this that Jesus was, without doubt, a son of Israel, a Jew, and very much a part of Israel's story. Although we know little about Jesus' childhood, Matthew wants us to know that he has a childhood, and that in itself is significant. Perhaps in hearing a story like this, of overcoming very real challenges, of settling in to raise a family in a certain community, we get a better sense of who God is. The God of Jesus Christ chose to dwell among us in the flesh. That is not just a high-minded idea, but it is about things like stories of moving and setting down roots and settling in, imagining a life with a family, and actually living it. And God is with us in the midst of all of these details, of our life transitions, the challenges and bumps on the road, however they happen in our lives.